a baby bear crying for help, a desperate mother, a silent witness from another species, and a forest rescue so unbelievable it could only be true. In the misty wilds of the Rocky Mountains, a scream shattered the quiet. But it wasn't from a human. It came from a tiny cub trapped in the grip of a deadly python, and what followed next defied everything we thought we knew about animal instinct, compassion, and interspecies connection. Stay with us, because this is not just a story of survival. It's a story of courage, love, and a moment where nature held its breath. Before we begin, be sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss more real-life stories like this, of the wild, the brave, and the beautifully unexpected. The afternoon light bathed the forest in a golden haze, filtering through towering pine trees like soft lace. In the heart of the Rockies, where the trails disappeared into silence and moss blanketed everything like a secret, a family of grizzly bears lay nestled in a sun-dappled clearing. The mother, a large, broad-shouldered grizzly with fading scars hidden beneath her thick fur, rested with her cubs at her side. 3 in total, but one was always different. The smallest of the litter, barely over 30 pounds, was curious in a way the others were not. He was born late in the season, weaker at first, but his eyes sparkled with a kind of wonder the others didn't show. His mother had noticed, of course. She always kept him closest. But there's only so much a mother can control in the wild. He saw the butterfly just before it landed. A blue monarch, rare this late in the season. Its wings shimmered like fragments of the sky. The cub tilted his head, nose twitching, mesmerized. He rose slowly from the warmth of his mother's side, careful not to wake her or jostle his siblings, and took a few steps forward. The butterfly fluttered. He followed. What began as a few innocent steps became a quiet march through the underbrush. The cub moved through ferns and fallen logs, his small paws barely making a sound. The butterfly always remained just out of reach, dancing through beams of light like a phantom. And the cub. He kept walking. He didn't know how far he'd gone, didn't notice that the light had dimmed, that the air had turned damp and heavy, that the trees here were older, closer, and darker. He didn't know that these woods weren't safe, that nature, even in its beauty, is full of silent killers. A rustle beneath a bed of dry leaves. Then, stillness. The cub paused. He sniffed, looked up. The butterfly was gone. He turned to go back, ears twitching. And that's when it struck. The python launched from beneath a cluster of dead foliage with terrifying speed. In seconds, its thick, muscular body coiled around the cub, yanking him off the ground with crushing force. A scream. Not a growl. Not a whimper. A scream. High-pitched, sharp, unnatural in the wild. The kind of sound that slices through bark, wind, and even silence itself. It was the sound of a child in pain. Far away, the mother bear lifted her head sharply. A beat of silence. Then she roared. The trees shook with the sound. Birds fled the canopy in swarms. Her heart pounded as she rose like thunder, her senses on fire. Without hesitation, she barreled into the trees, crashing through branches, leaping over rocks, guided by something deeper than instinct, guided by fear. She found them in a shadowed hollow near a mossy ridge. The python had wrapped its body completely around the cub, who now struggled only in flickers of movement, each gasp weaker than the last. The mother bear didn't pause. She launched herself at the snake, biting and clawing with the rage of something that had nothing left to lose. Her jaws tore at its back. Her claws ripped through scales. She roared, snarled, slammed her body against it. But still, the serpent squeezed tighter. Each second was death counting down, and somewhere nearby, something watched. Two amber eyes blinked behind a thicket. A silhouette rose, larger than a man, hair dark as soil, shoulders like stone, fingers curled around a branch full of berries. It was a gorilla, a lone silverback released months earlier as part of a conservation rewilding project. Most believed he wouldn't survive, that he'd vanish into the forest or succumb to the cold. But he had survived, and now he had found something no one would believe. His eyes locked with the bear's for a fraction of a second, and in that impossible instant, she didn't growl, didn't posture. She simply stared, desperate, begging. The gorilla didn't move at first. His body was still, his eyes unreadable, but something passed between them. Not language, not instinct, but something older. Recognition. Then he turned and disappeared into the trees, but not away, toward something, toward help. Emily Thompson had learned to read the forest like a second language. As a wildlife ranger stationed deep in the northern Rockies, she'd grown used to the rhythm of the trees, the way birdsong dipped just before a predator appeared, how the silence of the wind sometimes said more than any sound ever could. But nothing in her training, not the emergency rescues, not the search and recovery drills, prepared her for what she saw that morning. She was checking a section of old forest trail just above the valley basin when movement at the edge of her vision made her freeze. Her fingers tightened around the strap of her binoculars. A shadow moved among the trees, upright, heavy, deliberate. A black bear? No. The gait was different, more human. Then he stepped into view. A gorilla, large, powerful, still as a statue. Her breath caught. She didn't move. She barely blinked. He stared at her for a long, long moment. His eyes, amber and alert, scanned her face like he was reading her. There was no aggression, no fear, just focus, intention. And then, slowly, he turned his broad back to her, took a few steps, stopped, looked over his shoulder, took another step, another pause. Emily's heart pounded. Every nerve in her body screamed at her to stay cautious. She'd been taught to never follow unpredictable animals, no matter how calm they seemed. But something deeper, something instinctual, told her this was different. This wasn't a wild animal wandering randomly. This was a messenger. And he wanted her to follow. So she did. For nearly 15 minutes, she trailed him through thick forest, across shallow streams and over fallen logs. The gorilla moved with strange elegance, fast but careful, never too far ahead. He looked back often, making sure she was there, like he needed her to be. Then he stopped. Emily saw the clearing before she heard it. The sounds of struggle, the snapping of branches, the deep, guttural roars that froze her breath in her throat. She crept to the edge of the tree line. What she saw shattered her. A massive grizzly, the mother, locked in a brutal, losing battle with something enormous and wrong. A python. Its muscular coils had tightened around a small, lifeless cub. The mother raged with all her strength, teeth slashing, claws digging, but the snake held fast. The cub's body no longer fought. Emily moved on instinct. She dropped her binoculars, reached for the rescue knife on her belt. With her other hand, she grabbed the can of industrial-grade pepper spray, used only in dire emergencies. The gorilla stepped aside, almost like he was making space for her. Emily entered the clearing. The mother bear turned to face her, blood on her snout, body heaving. They locked eyes. Emily stopped cold. The bear didn't charge. She didn't move. She just looked. And in her eyes, Emily saw something no textbook had ever described. Grief. Panic. A plea. A mother who would do anything, even trust a human, to save her child. Emily nodded once, slowly. She moved toward the serpent, cautiously. She used a branch to prod the python's head. It recoiled slightly, just enough. She sprayed it once, directly near the eyes. The snake recoiled with a violent jerk, its grip loosening for a split second. That was all she needed. Emily dropped to her knees, knife flashing. She began cutting through the coils, one by one. It wasn't clean. It wasn't fast. But it was enough. The final coil fell away. The cub dropped to the ground, limp, gasping. Emily staggered back as the snake slithered into the undergrowth, defeated, its massive body leaving a trail of flattened leaves behind. Silence. The mother bear rushed to her cub, nudged him, licked his tiny body with urgency, moaning low in her throat. Then, a small cough, a shudder, and the cub breathed. Emily's knees gave out. She sat in the dirt, eyes wide with disbelief, tears mixing with the mud on her cheeks. She looked up to where the gorilla had stood, but he was already gone, vanished into the shadows of the trees, like he was never there at all. The clearing had fallen into a sacred stillness. Emily sat motionless, her pulse slowly calming in her ears. The sun had dropped lower, throwing long shadows across the dirt, illuminating the battered body of the python's path and the gentle rise and fall of the cub's chest. The mother bear still hadn't left her cub's side. She licked him softly, over and over, checking his limbs, his breath, nudging him upright with her snout. The cub whimpered weakly, but he was alive. Emily was careful not to move too suddenly. Her knife lay in the dirt beside her, forgotten. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from awe. She had read about animal intelligence, about problem-solving, communication, and emotion in the wild. But nothing she had ever seen or studied could compare to what had just happened. A grizzly bear had asked for help. A gorilla had delivered it. And a human had become the bridge between them. The bear stood slowly now, her breathing more controlled. She turned toward Emily. This time, there was no panic, no warning growl, just understanding. Their eyes met again, for the third time. Something unspoken passed between them. It wasn't gratitude in the human sense, but it was something close. Recognition, maybe. Trust, in the smallest measure. Then the Ursa moved gently, picking up her cub by the scruff, and began to retreat toward the shadows of the forest. She paused at the edge, just for a moment, and looked back once, and then she was gone. Emily remained where she was, tears drying on her cheeks, her breath slow and steady. For minutes, maybe more, she couldn't move. She couldn't even think. Her brain couldn't process what her heart had witnessed. Later that evening, she hiked back to base camp, her body exhausted but alert. Every step felt like walking through a dream. At camp, she tried to write a report. She opened her laptop, stared at the screen, and closed it again. What could she even say? Today, I followed a rewilded gorilla into the forest, assisted in rescuing a bear cub from a Burmese python, and locked eyes with a grieving mother bear who asked for my help. No protocol covered this. She instead made a private field note. October 12th, Rocky Mountain Sector 4, male silverback gorilla spotted. Unusual behavior. Appeared to seek out human contact, then guided ranger toward active threat involving wild grizzly bear and cub. No aggression observed between species. Intervention successful. Witnessed interspecies cooperation. Unexplainable. Sacred. She closed her journal gently, hands resting on the cover. She knew the higher-ups would need some version of this, something logical, something clinical. But what she had seen couldn't be filed under routine wildlife interaction. It had felt spiritual. Over the following days, Emily couldn't stop thinking about the bear. Had the cub survived the night? Were they still together? And the gorilla? Where had he gone? He hadn't been seen since. No other rangers had reported contact. The project scientists had written off the silverback as a low-visibility individual, a polite way of saying we've lost track of him. But Emily knew better. He wasn't lost. He had simply returned to the quiet. The shadows. The space where wild things don't need to be understood, only respected. And perhaps in time, that would be enough. But one morning, as frost kissed the grass outside her cabin, she woke early, heart thudding with that old instinct, like the forest was calling again. She stepped outside, bundled in flannel and boots, and saw them. Tracks. Tiny bear cub prints, next to much larger ones. They stopped right outside her cabin, then turned back toward the forest. Emily sank to her knees beside them, ran her fingers across the impressions. They had come here. They had come to see her, to say something. And that was all she needed. It started with a drone. Buzzing, barely audible at first, like a faraway hornet. Emily had been in the eastern sector of the park, scanning the tree line for trail damage after a recent storm, when the sound interrupted the morning stillness. She looked up just in time to see it. A black commercial quadcopter with flashing blue lights, hovering over the canopy. Not a government model. Not from the Park Service. Someone else was watching the forest. That night, back at Ranger headquarters, Emily's fears were confirmed. A group of hikers had posted a video online, grainy footage of a giant bear with a baby spotted walking near the base of the ridge. The video had gone viral within hours, racking up hundreds of thousands of views. Worse, the comments had taken a dark turn. Why aren't they relocating these bears? A mother grizzly with a cub, dangerous as hell, and that close to people? If they don't move it, someone's gonna shoot it. Emily clenched her jaw. Then came the second video. This one, shorter, but somehow even more unbelievable. A trail cam had picked up a figure moving upright through a corridor of trees. Massive, muscular, black-furred, walking like a man. The gorilla. No way this is real. Gorilla in the Rockies? Someone's pet escaped. This is what happens when you play God with nature. Emily's heart sank. The two beings that had been part of something so pure, so impossible, were now viral content. Targets of fear, confusion, and public opinion. By morning, her office phone rang non-stop. First, Wildlife Services. Then, the Regional Conservation Authority. Finally, the Federal Invasive Species Unit. Each conversation worse than the last. "They're concerned," said her supervisor, Dan Miller, his voice carefully neutral. "They want both animals located, possibly removed. For public safety." Emily stared at him. "Removed?" she repeated. "For what? Existing?" Dan sighed. "You know how this works. A bear that shows comfort around humans is a threat. A non-native primate interacting with native predators? It's a headline waiting to explode." Emily stood, fists clenched. "They saved each other." "I believe you," Dan said quietly. "But politics doesn't care about miracles." She hiked the ridge that evening, heart heavy, eyes scanning every grove, every rustling shadow. No sign of the bear. No sign of the cub. No sign of him. She sat beside a cold fire pit near the spot where the rescue had happened. The forest felt quieter now, like it knew it was being watched. She pulled her notebook from her pack and scribbled furiously. "They're coming. The ones who measure nature by threat level and monetary impact. They don't see compassion. They see liability. But I saw a mother who trusted me. I saw a creature who crossed species lines to ask for help. And I will not stay silent." The next morning, a black SUV rolled into the ranger station. 3 men stepped out. Polished boots, government tags, neutral expressions. Emily met them on the porch. "Ranger Thompson," one said, "we'd like to discuss the recent wildlife incident. In particular, your claims." She narrowed her eyes. "Then let's talk. But you won't find fear here. Only truth." They didn't smile. They only opened their folders. But even as Emily prepared to fight a system much larger than her, deep in the forest, something else stirred. The Ursa, sensing the shift in the wind. The gorilla, watching from a ridge. Something was coming, and none of them would remain untouched. 3 days later, the tranquil veil over the forest was ripped apart. A team of federal agents arrived before sunrise. No announcements, no coordination with local rangers, no courtesy. Just heavy boots, utility vehicles, and metal crates stacked in the backs of black transport trucks. They called it a precautionary relocation operation. But Emily knew what it really was. A removal. Dan tried to stop them, at least slow them down, but he was outranked and outnumbered. Emily had seen that look on his face before, the quiet defeat of someone forced to watch the wilderness be trimmed into something manageable. She walked up to the lead officer, a hard-faced man named Collins. "I know this forest," she said, firm but calm. "You move in with drones, dogs, and guns. You won't just scare them. You'll destroy any chance of peaceful contact." Collins didn't look up from his clipboard. "We're not interested in contact. We're interested in control." Emily's fists clenched at her sides. "They haven't hurt anyone." Collins shrugged. "Yet." By mid-morning, the first sweep began. A drone spotted the Ursa and her cub near the southern stream, the same place Emily had seen their tracks. She begged to accompany the team. They refused. She wasn't needed, they said. She was too close to the truth, maybe. From a distance, hidden behind ferns and brush, Emily watched as a pair of agents moved in with tranquilizer rifles. The cub had grown stronger, was walking confidently now, but he still leaned into his mother's side like a shadow. The mother bear froze as the wind shifted. She smelled them. She didn't run. She roared, a sound filled with memory. But the agents were ready. The first dart struck her in the shoulder. She staggered. The second dart hit her rear flank. The cub panicked, screaming. That same high-pitched cry from before. He tried to nuzzle her, to wake her. She fell. Emily ran. She didn't think. She didn't ask. She crashed through underbrush, yelling, arms raised. "Stop! Stop!" The agents turned, startled. She threw herself between them and the cub, who was now pressed against his mother's body, trembling. "You'll have to shoot me too," she said. The forest fell quiet. Only the cub's panicked breaths broke the silence. The officers hesitated. Then Collins arrived, eyes narrow. "You're interfering with a federal operation," he growled. Emily didn't move. "You're interfering with something sacred." Collins stepped closer. "This isn't a debate." "Then put that in your report," she snapped. "She trusted me, and you've destroyed that." The cub let out a broken cry. It didn't sound like a bear. It sounded like a child who'd lost everything. Emily's voice broke. "She's not just wildlife. She's a mother. You don't understand what you're taking away." Collins paused. For the first time, doubt flickered in his eyes. But then his radio crackled. "We've got movement," said a voice. "North Ridge, possible primate. Send backup." Collins straightened. "Move the bear. Contain the cub." Then he turned and walked away. Emily stared at the lifeless form of the Ursa. Tears filled her eyes. She whispered, "I'm sorry." But the forest had heard it all, and someone else had too. High above, on the northern ridge, two amber eyes watched through the trees. The gorilla, silent. Still, he had seen the betrayal, the weapons, the fall, and now he knew. The humans who offered safety could also take it away. Emily might have been different, but the world she served was not. That night, the camp was quiet. The mother bear remained sedated in a steel enclosure. The cub, alone in a holding pen, refused to eat. And somewhere, far in the woods, something ancient stirred. not in anger, but in sorrow, because in that moment, even the wild knew the cost of trust is grief. Night had fallen like a shroud over the forest. The ranger station buzzed with tension. Agents moved like shadows between the tents and floodlights, their radios hissing with static and clipped updates. The grisly mother remained in a steel enclosure near the transport vehicle, sedated but beginning to stir. Her cub sat curled in a smaller crate, unmoving, his back to the world. Emily stood alone near the edge of the clearing, staring at the dark tree line. She could still hear the cry the cub made when his mother dropped. It hadn't stopped echoing in her mind. That sound had broken something inside her. And now, standing between the forest and the fences, she felt something else rising. Not rage, not fear, but resolve. She walked quietly to the operations tent. Inside, the agents had mapped out routes, schedules, and containment protocols. The gorilla had not been located yet. The bear and cub would be relocated at first light. Emily stared at the map, and then she made her decision. She waited until 2:43 a.m. when the patrols changed shifts and most of the station was quiet. The moonlight was pale but steady, casting silver light over the camp. She moved quickly and silently. First to the cub. The little bear didn't react as she opened the crate. His head remained low, but when he saw her face, his ears twitched. He stood slowly. "Shh," she whispered. "It's okay. I'm getting you home." He stepped out and nuzzled gently into her leg, just once, before following her. Emily led him to the edge of the camp where the mother bear's enclosure stood. She climbed the side gate quietly, crouched beside the sleeping giant. "Come on, Mama," she whispered. "Time to wake up." She had a reversal agent, a low dose to counteract sedation, technically illegal without clearance, but necessary. She injected the dart into the bear's hind leg and waited. Minutes passed. Her hands shook. Then, movement, a groan, a twitch. The Ursa's breathing quickened, and when her eyes opened, dazed, confused, they locked on Emily, and then on her cub. A low whimper escaped her throat. The cub rushed to her side, climbed halfway over her neck, burying himself in her fur. She grunted and moved slowly, wobbly but aware. Emily opened the final latch. "Go," she whispered. At first, they didn't. But then the wind shifted, and they knew. Mother and cub slipped into the shadows, one step at a time, swallowed by the forest that had always been theirs. Emily turned to go, and that's when the voice cut through the dark. "Don't move." Flashlights, footsteps, radios flaring to life. Collins, and 3 other agents surrounding her. She raised her hands slowly. "You release them?" Collins asked, stunned. Emily nodded once. "I did." He stepped forward, furious. "You've just compromised a federal operation. You're done." Emily stood tall. "No, I just fixed one." The others hesitated. And then, from the woods behind her, came a low, deliberate sound. A rustle, a branch snapping. And then, him, the gorilla, stepping out of the shadows, slow, deliberate. He didn't charge. He didn't posture. He just stood beside Emily and looked at Collins. And in that moment, no one spoke. Even the agents froze, because whatever line they thought existed between animal and human, it no longer held. Emily looked at Collins. "You still think this is about containment?" The gorilla turned his back to them and disappeared into the trees. Emily followed his silhouette with her eyes until it was gone. And then, without another word, she walked into the dark, back to the station, ready for the consequences, but finally at peace, because the forest had been heard, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Weeks passed. Autumn deepened its grip on the Rockies. The trees blazed in amber and rust, and the scent of pine mingled with cold earth. A hush had settled over the forest, like it was holding a secret. Emily hadn't worn her uniform since the night she let the bears go. She was suspended from active duty, pending an internal investigation. Her decision, releasing federally detained wildlife, was technically unlawful. The paperwork had piled up. The questions came in waves. But so did the support. The video footage from that night, including blurry camera glimpses of the gorilla standing beside her, had leaked. The internet didn't react with fear this time. They reacted with awe. A bear, a gorilla, and a ranger. This isn't just wildlife. This is a miracle. Proof that compassion exists across species. Protect her. Protect them. Petitions were launched. Letters poured in from across the country. Wildlife organizations rallied to defend her. Conservationists offered testimony. Biologists weighed in on what they called the most significant interspecies behavioral event ever recorded in North America. Still, no one had seen the gorilla since, and the mother bear and her cub had vanished back into the wild. Some said they were dead, but Emily didn't believe it, because she knew how to listen. And one morning, the forest whispered back. It was nearly dawn when she returned to the ridge. Her boots pressed into frozen earth as she made her way up the trail she knew better than her own street. The air was crisp. Still, she carried no weapons, no gear, only a thermos of tea. And hope. She reached the clearing. It looked different now. Healed, somehow. The brush had regrown where the crates had stood. The ground was undisturbed. The trees cast long shadows. But in the center, at the edge of a small pool of melted snow, she saw it. A paw print. Fresh. Small. Then another. Larger. Side by side. She smiled, tears already in her eyes. They were alive. And more than that, they had come back here, to this place, to remember. Emily sat by the prints, sipping her tea, not expecting anything more. But nature had one final gift. A rustle. From the far side of the clearing. She turned, and there he was, the gorilla. A mother grizzly chained in the freezing Montana wilderness, her starving cubs crying out, their tiny bodies trembling against her. No one knew they were there. No one heard their desperate pleas. But one man, grieving his own loss, would stumble upon them. and what he did next would change all their lives forever. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. This helps us bring more inspiring stories like this to you. Get ready for a true story of survival, sacrifice, and the unbreakable bond between a mother and her young. A story that will stay with you long after it ends. The Montana wilderness in early winter is both breathtaking and brutal. Pines heavy with snow leaned toward the earth, and the wind carved through the valley like a blade. At the edge of a forgotten clearing stood a crumbling log cabin, its walls sagging under decades of neglect. And there, chained to a post outside, was Willow. Willow, a magnificent mother grizzly, once ruled these forests with quiet power. But now she was a shadow of herself, ribs showing, fur patchy, and eyes dulled by exhaustion. Wrapped around her legs were her two cubs, tiny bundles of fur pressing against her for warmth. Their cries pierced the frozen air, faint but desperate, their tiny paws scratching at the snow for food that wasn't there. The chain around Willow's neck dug into her thick fur, leaving a ring of raw skin. She had been trapped months ago by Frank Mullins, an aging recluse known in the nearby town of Hamilton as a loner with a mean streak. For Frank, Willow was a trophy, proof that he still had power over something fierce, something wild. But now, even Frank had stopped caring. In a small cabin 5 miles away, Jack Martin adjusted the lens on his camera. A wildlife photographer by trade, Jack had escaped to Montana hoping to outrun his own ghosts. A year earlier, his wife Emily had passed from cancer, and the weight of grief had driven him into the mountains, where the silence was less suffocating. That morning, as Jack stood on a ridge, a strange sound drifted through the air. He frowned. It wasn't the howl of wolves or the crack of ice. It was softer, almost pleading. Instinct tugged at him. He lowered his camera and listened. The cries came again. Without fully knowing why, Jack set off toward the sound, his boots crunching through the snow. As he moved closer, the noise sharpened into distinct, pitiful whimpers. His heart began to race, his breath misting in the cold as the trees parted. And then he saw them. Willow lifted her massive head as Jack emerged, eyes locking onto his with a mix of warning and something else. Her cubs huddled at her side, their tiny bodies shaking. Jack's stomach twisted. This wasn't a wild encounter. This was cruelty. He instinctively lifted his camera, and then slowly lowered it. This wasn't a moment to capture. This was a moment to change. Jack stood frozen at the edge of the clearing, his heart pounding so loudly in his chest he could hear it in his ears. He had seen grizzlies before, from a safe distance, through a lens, from a hide, but never like this. Never chained, never broken, never with two helpless cubs looking up at their mother as if she could save them. Willow didn't snarl or lunge. She simply stared at Jack with hollow eyes, as if weighing whether this human was just another source of pain or something different. Jack's throat tightened. The cubs pressed into Willow's sides, their thin cries like small knives in the cold air. Jack scanned the scene. The chain was rusted but thick, wrapped cruelly around a post buried in frozen earth. Nearby, a filthy metal bowl sat overturned, no food or water in sight. His stomach twisted again. anger simmering in his chest. Who could do this? The answer came before he had time to wonder. The door of the cabin creaked open, and Frank Mullins stepped out. His face was hard and lined, his eyes sharp despite the whiskey bottle dangling from his hand. A shotgun rested lazily in the crook of his arm. He squinted at Jack, his voice a low growl. "What the hell are you doing here?" Jack raised his hand slightly, trying to keep his voice calm. I'm just a photographer. I heard something. Thought maybe an animal was hurt." Frank barked a laugh that held no humor. "Animal's fine. Go back where you came from." Jack's gaze flicked to Willow, then back to Frank. "She's chained." Frank's eyes narrowed. "Ain't your business." For a moment, neither man spoke. The only sounds were the wind whispering through the trees and the cub's soft cries. Jack felt his pulse hammering in his throat. He could walk away. He should walk away. But something rooted him to the spot. He thought of Emily, of how she used to fight for every lost thing, every forgotten cause. She would have hated him if he turned his back. "I didn't mean to intrude," Jack said finally, forcing a small, tense smile. "Just passing through." Frank grunted, satisfied, and retreated into the cabin. The door shut with a hollow bang. Jack exhaled slowly, his breath steaming in the cold. He glanced once more at Willow. Her eyes met his, deep pools of sorrow and endurance, and something in Jack's chest cracked. He turned and walked away, his boots crunching in the snow. But every step felt like betrayal. By the time he reached his own cabin, night was falling, and the cold had deepened. Jack sat by the fire, but the warmth didn't touch him. All he could see were Willow's eyes. All he could hear were the cub's cries. He knew he'd go back. He had no choice. That night, Jack barely slept. The images haunted him. Willow's thin frame, the cub's desperate cries, the cold iron biting into her neck. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her again. And every time, he opened them with a sharp breath, heart pounding in the darkness of his cabin. By dawn, Jack had made his decision. He brewed a pot of coffee, his hands trembling slightly, and spread a map of the area across the kitchen table. His fingers traced the winding trail to Frank's cabin, then farther west to the boundary of a protected wildlife reserve. If he could get the bears there, they'd be safe. But first, he had to find a way to free them. Jack packed his bag with the essentials: a thermos of coffee, an old first aid kit, a flashlight, some protein bars, and, after a long, uncertain pause, a pair of heavy-duty bolt cutters he kept in the shed. As he drove toward Frank's cabin, the snow came down in lazy flurries, soft but relentless. Jack rehearsed what he'd say. He couldn't just rush in and cut the chain. Frank was unpredictable, and the last thing Jack wanted was a confrontation with a drunk man and a shotgun. No, he needed time. He needed trust. Jack parked a safe distance away and hiked the last mile. When he arrived, Frank was on the porch, nursing a bottle and a cigarette, his lined face squinting against the morning light. Willow stirred faintly at the sound of Jack's approach, but her cubs didn't even look up, too weak from hunger. Jack forced a casual tone. "Morning." Frank grunted. "Back again, huh? Brought you something?" Jack said, holding out the coffee and a pack of cigarettes he'd grabbed from the gas station. Frank's eyes flickered with surprise and suspicion. Figured you might be running low. For a moment, Jack thought Frank would tell him to shove off. But then, with a small grunt, Frank took the offerings and gestured to the porch chair. Suit yourself. Jack sat, every muscle tense, every sense on alert. Over the next hour, he listened, or pretended to, as Frank rambled about his glory days, hunting trips, bar fights, women who'd come and gone. Jack's eyes kept drifting to the clearing, to Willow, to the cubs, and every time, he swallowed the sharp knot of urgency rising in his throat. As the sun dipped lower, Frank grew drowsy, the whiskey sinking its claws deeper. Jack waited until the old man finally stumbled inside, the door swinging shut behind him. Heart racing, Jack slipped from the porch and crossed the clearing, his boots sinking silently into the snow. Willow watched him, motionless but alert. Jack knelt a few feet away, whispering, "I'm trying, girl. I swear." He reached out, fingers brushing the cold iron chain. The bolt cutters felt heavy in his hands. Not tonight, he told himself. Soon, but not tonight. As he slipped back into the trees, one of the cubs let out a thin, reedy cry. Jack paused, his eyes stinging. Hold on, he thought. Please, just hold on. That night, the storm arrived with a vengeance. The wind howled down the mountainside, rattling the windows of Jack's cabin and sweeping sheets of snow across the forest. Inside, Jack paced the floor, his heart in his throat. He couldn't stop imagining Willow and her cubs, exposed to the full fury of the storm, their thin bodies huddled together for warmth they barely had. He tried calling the wildlife authorities again. No answer. He checked the weather forecast, blizzard warnings, road closures, avalanche risks. His fingers drummed on the window frame as he stared into the swirling dark. At dawn, the storm showed no signs of slowing. Jack yanked on his thickest coat, shoved food and water into his pack, and forced his way into the blinding snow. The trail was nearly invisible, buried beneath drifts that reached his knees. Every step was a battle, his breath coming hard and fast in the frigid air. More than once, he had to stop and brace himself against the wind. But he kept moving, driven by a force he couldn't name, something stronger than guilt, fiercer than fear. When he reached the clearing, his chest clenched in horror. Willow and her cubs were barely visible, half buried in a mound of snow. The cubs' small bodies trembled violently, their whimpers faint and broken. Willow had curled herself around them as best she could, but even she was shivering, her great body coated in frost. Jack ran forward, falling to his knees in the snow. His gloved hands reached out instinctively, but he stopped himself, unsure, afraid of startling her, of making things worse. Willow's eyes flickered open, heavy and glassy, and for a moment they simply stared at each other, man and beast, both caught in the same desperate moment. "Hang on," Jack whispered, voice thick with panic. "Just hang on." The cabin door slammed open. Frank stumbled out, wrapped in a threadbare coat, a bottle clutched in one hand. He squinted at Jack, his breath fogging in the air. "What the hell are you doing?" Frank slurred. Jack's anger, long simmering, snapped. They're dying out here." Frank laughed, a dry, bitter sound. "Not my problem." Jack surged to his feet, fists clenched. "Then why chain them up? Why keep them at all?" Frank's face twisted into something dark. For a moment, Jack thought the old man would swing the bottle at him, but then Frank just spat into the snow and turned away. "Suit yourself," he muttered, stumbling back into the cabin. Jack's heart thundered. His legs felt weak, his skin numb from cold, but he knew, in that moment, there was no cavalry coming, no help on the way. It was up to him. As the wind screamed around him, Jack crouched beside Willow and whispered, "Hold on, girl. I'm going to fix this." That night, Jack lay awake in his cabin, staring at the ceiling while the storm rattled the walls. He could still feel Willow's frozen breath against his skin, still hear the faint, broken sounds of the cubs buried beneath her. The weight in his chest was unbearable, a crushing, desperate urgency. He got up. His hands moved on instinct, stuffing supplies into his pack, grabbing the bolt cutters from the shed, pulling on every layer of clothing he owned. As the blizzard raged, Jack made his way back toward Frank's cabin, one slow, determined step at a time. By the time he reached the clearing, the world was silent except for the hiss of the wind. Frank's cabin was dark. The old man had either passed out or given up entirely. Jack's heart pounded as he crouched beside Willow, breath steaming in the icy air. "It's me," he whispered. "I'm here." Willow raised her head weakly, her breath shallow, eyes dull but aware. She watched him without moving, as if she understood that this human, this fragile, trembling human, was her only chance. Jack pulled the bolt cutters from his pack. His hands shook as he fit the jaws around the rusted chain. For a moment, his grip faltered, fear surging through him. Would Willow panic? Would she lash out? But Willow only stared, her massive chest rising and falling in slow, labored breaths. With a sharp squeeze, Jack cut through the first link. The sound of snapping metal cracked through the night like a gunshot. He froze, heart hammering, and waited. Nothing. He moved to the next link, and the next, sweat pouring down his face despite the cold. Every snap felt like the beat of a drum in his ears. Finally, with one last squeeze, the chain fell away, a twisted heap in the snow. Jack stumbled back, chest heaving. Willow rose slowly, unsteadily, like a creature waking from a long nightmare. Her cubs whimpered, pressing into her side. She turned, towering over Jack, and for a breathless second, man and bear stared at each other across the thin line that divided their worlds. A sound tore through the quiet, the cabin door crashing open. Frank burst into the clearing, shotgun in hand, his face twisted in rage. "You son of a—" Jack threw himself in front of Willow, arms spread wide. His voice cracked as he shouted, "Enough!" Frank staggered forward, gun raised. But then he saw them. Not just Willow, but the cubs. Not just the bear, but the family. For a long, terrible moment, no one moved. And then, something shifted in Frank's face. His grip on the gun loosened. His shoulders sagged. With a bitter grunt, Frank lowered the barrel and spat into the snow. "Get them the hell off my land." Jack's knees buckled with relief. He turned, voice shaking. "Come on, girl. Let's go." Jack's heart pounded in his ears as he led Willow and her cubs away from the clearing, his boots crunching through the deep snow. The storm had quieted, but the cold was unforgiving, sharp, punishing, and relentless. He could hear the cubs stumbling behind him, their tiny whimpers carried on the wind. Every few steps, Jack glanced back. Willow trudged forward, her massive body shielding her cubs from the cold. She was weak, swaying on her feet, but the fire in her eyes had returned. There was no chain now, no man holding her down. But the hardest part was still ahead. They reached the edge of the trees, where the old logging road cut across the mountain. Jack knew it led to the edge of the wildlife reserve, to safety. But between here and there was open ground, and Frank's cabin still loomed behind them, dark and silent, though Jack could feel its shadow like a weight between his shoulder blades. He paused, resting his hands on his knees, his breath clouding in the air. "Almost there," he murmured, more to himself than to Willow. A soft rustling made him spin around. Frank. The old man stood just inside the tree line, shotgun slung over one shoulder. His face was unreadable, lined and weathered like the mountains themselves. For a moment, Jack thought the nightmare wasn't over. But then Frank surprised him. He raised a hand, not in threat, but in something almost like surrender. His voice, when it came, was rough but tired. "Go." Jack's chest tightened as relief flooded through him. No more fights, no more guns. Just a broken man, watching the last wild thing he'd tried to control walk away. Jack turned back to Willow and stepped onto the open road, guiding her forward. His legs were trembling now, every muscle screaming in protest. The cubs stumbled in the snow, and Willow nudged them gently, urging them on. Suddenly, the ice beneath Jack's foot cracked. His stomach lurched. A thin layer of frozen runoff, and under it, a ditch. Jack threw himself backward as the ice gave way, crashing into the frigid water below. Panic flared as he struggled to climb out, his soaked clothes dragging him down. Willow turned at the sound, her body tense, eyes locked on him. For one wild heartbeat, Jack thought, "This is it." But then, something incredible. Willow lumbered toward the edge, paws splayed wide, massive weight balanced with astonishing care. She crouched low, close enough for Jack to see the wet steam of her breath. For one insane, impossible second, it was as if she was waiting for him to reach her. With a last desperate push, Jack scrambled from the ditch, gasping, freezing, shaking with adrenaline. Willow huffed softly, as if satisfied, and turned back to her cubs. Together, they crossed the last stretch of snow. Jack followed, soaked to the bone, every step a battle. But his heart was burning. And when they reached the safety of the reserve, when Willow paused and lifted her head to the mountains, Jack knew they were home. The sun was just beginning to rise, painting the Montana sky in strokes of pink and gold. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world softened by snow and silence. Jack stood at the edge of the wildlife reserve, his clothes still damp and cold, but he barely felt it. Before him, Willow paused. She turned her great head and looked back at Jack. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. There was no sound but the quiet breath of the forest, no movement but the trembling of the cubs at her side. Their eyes met across the distance. Man and bear, separated by worlds, but bound by something deeper than language or species. Jack felt the sting of tears as Willow let out a soft, low huff, almost like a sigh. Then, without another glance, she led her cubs into the trees. Jack watched them go, the little ones tumbling after their mother, their small footprints vanishing in the fresh snow. He stood there long after they disappeared, the silence pressing in around him. Slowly, his knees gave way, and he sank into the snow, his chest heaving with emotion. For the first time since Emily's death, he felt something break loose inside him, a knot of grief and guilt he hadn't been able to untangle. It loosened, softened, until all that was left was quiet, trembling gratitude. He reached for his camera, lifted it, and captured one final shot. The fading trail in the snow, the dawn spilling light across the mountains, and the last glimpse of a mother's silhouette moving into the wild. Weeks later, back in town, Jack's photo would be published in local papers and shared across social media. People called him a hero, but Jack never saw it that way. He had simply done what his heart couldn't ignore. Frank's cabin was abandoned soon after. Some said he left town, others said the forest had finally swallowed his past. For Jack, the mountains remained his refuge, but now they were no longer a place to run away from life. They were a place to remember its most profound truths, that love is sacrifice, that courage often comes quietly, and that even the wildest hearts carry the power to heal us. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Share it with someone who loves inspiring stories and help us spread messages of courage and hope. Remember, even in the darkest places, compassion can change everything.